Let's be clear about what the president is responding to, because many in this room want to talk about the president's response, but not what brought the president to responding.
Remember when President Trump straight up told us he was going to hell?
I think I'm not maybe heaven bound.
But he thinks that after this week, God is back on board.
The joke only lasted 42 seconds, but the fallout is still ongoing. One SNL monologue dragged Donald Trump and Karoline Leavitt into the spotlight. And by the end of the night, the internet wasn't laughing anymore. Screenshots started resurfacing. Old statements got replayed. And suddenly, the response wasn't confident. It was furious. What exactly did the host say that triggered this level of damage control? Because whatever it was, it clearly hit something real.
I think it's frankly ridiculous that anyone in this room would even suggest that President Trump is doing anything for his own benefit. He left a life of luxury and a life of running a very successful real estate empire.
Search the county election hub in Georgia looking for ballots to back up President Trump's false claim that the 2020 election was rigged. Jesus, man, let it go. I mean, even Hitler stopped trying to get into art school at some point.
If you're enjoying this, please subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you think. The entire political strategy collapses the moment someone lines up your greatest hits and plays them back to back without the dramatic music. That is exactly what happened when Donald Trump and Karoline Leavitt found themselves on the receiving end of a methodical comedic autopsy, but on their own words stitched together with surgical timing.
Conference celebrating his first year in office, President Trump said that God was very proud of the job he's doing as president. Trump added that God was probably looking up at us right now, smiling from horn to hoof.
The meltdown was not sparked by some secret dossier being cracked open. It was triggered by pattern recognition, which is far more dangerous when the audience is already familiar with the source material.
President Trump said that he will only negotiate with Democrats when they agree to reopen the government, adding that he will not be extorted. Except that one time he famously got extorted by that mattress actress Stormy Daniels.
Colin Jost approached the situation the way a prosecutor approaches a closing argument, except instead of relying on legal statutes, he drew on public statements and viral moments that have been circulating online for years. Colin Jost did not need to exaggerate Trump's history of calling the media corrupt while simultaneously dominating every media cycle he touches. He simply reframed the contradiction in a way that made it impossible to ignore, suggesting that declaring war on the spotlight while sprinting toward is less a strategy and more a form of performance art. The focus then shifted toward Karoline Leavitt, who has built her reputation on being a rapid response shield for Trump's most controversial moments. Leavitt has sparred with reporters, dismissed unfavorable coverage as partisan, and confidently asserted that critics manufacture narratives out of thin air. The comedy implied that if narratives are being manufactured, they are at least using high-definition footage provided by the campaign itself. The snorts roast-treated her media appearances like chapters in the book titled How to Be Outraged at Everything Without Missing a Camera Cue.
President Trump has been inviting world leaders to join his Board of Peace or be crushed by his Council of Destruction. Trump's Board of Peace consists of countries such as Russia and Saudi Arabia, which is like if Law & Order SVU starred Diddy.
Meanwhile, Michael Che leaned into that theme with the kind of calm delivery that makes the punch land harder. Michael Che highlighted how every legal development surrounding Trump is framed by allies as either a witch hunt or a badge of honor, depending on the day's polling. He suggested that the messaging strategy resembles a streaming service that only offers one genre, which is political persecution drama, renewed for endless seasons, whether viewers request it or not. Trump's long-running feud with Saturday Night Live provided the perfect backdrop for the segment. Music. During his presidency, he repeatedly criticized the show's portrayals of him and accused it of bias despite having hosted it himself during the 2016 campaign. That history allowed the jokes to carry an extra layer of irony, because complaining about a comedy show mocking you while benefiting from the attention it generates is a paradox that practically writes itself. Just return to the broader theme of grievance as branding, pointing out that Trump's political machine often treats criticism as proof of righteousness. The suggestion was that if everyone is against you, that must mean you are doing something right, which is a compelling narrative until comedians begin listing the moments where the outrage seemed less principled and more predictable. By stacking these examples in quick succession, he turned repetition into the real punchline.
That night, President Trump made hundreds of posts on Truth Social, including conspiracy theories, attacks on Democrats, and even a video of his cameo in Home Alone 2, which I hadn't seen in a while, and I have to say, the dialogue, it hits different now. Check it out.
Excuse me, where's Jeffrey Epstein?
Leavitt's role in the Trump ecosystem became central to the satire because she represents a generational update to a familiar message. She is younger, media savvy, and quick on her feet. Yet, the themes she defends are remarkably consistent with Trump's long-standing approach. Che framed this dynamic as rebranding without renovation, implying that swapping out spokespeople does not change the foundation if the structure remains identical. Trump's background as a reality television star on The Apprentice only deepens the irony. A man who built a brand on televised confrontation now finds himself irritated when confrontation arrives packaged as satire. The comedic framing suggested that when politics adopts the aesthetics of entertainment, it cannot be shocked when entertainment critiques it using the same playbook. Colin Jost emphasized how often Trump and his allies dismiss mainstream outlets as dishonest while eagerly appearing on friendly networks to amplify their message. The contrast between condemning the media and leveraging it became a recurring thread, and the humor lay in presenting both sides of that relationship as inseparable. The segment implied that attacking the referee while staying in the game is not rebellion. It is choreography.
And this Judge Boasberg, is a Democrat activist. He was appointed by Barack Obama. His wife has donated more than $10,000 to Democrats, and he has consistently shown his disdain for this president and his policies, and it's unacceptable.
You took me right where I wanted to go about the idea that these people are all foreign terrorists, but Judge Boasberg was originally appointed by George W. Bush and then elevated by Barack Obama. I just feel like I should clear that up.
Again, Karoline Leavitt's media tour defending Trump during legal challenges provided additional fuel. Music. She has repeatedly framed investigations as politically motivated and portrayed critics as desperate to derail a movement. Che reframed that messaging as a reflex, suggesting that if gravity itself questioned the campaign, it would be accused of bias. The exaggeration worked because it felt adjacent to reality rather than detached from it. The so-called meltdown that followed the segment followed a script that felt almost pre-written. Trump allies criticized the show as irrelevant and out of touch, which is a curious strategy when responding publicly ensures the clip circulates further. Josh subtly highlighted this dynamic by implying that outrage in the Trump universe functions as rocket fuel, propelling the very narratives it claims to despise Michael Che, then pivoted back to Leavitt, noting how her forceful interviews often project unshakable certainty. The satire suggested that certainty becomes more fragile when placed next to archival footage that appears to contradict it. By juxtaposing confident declarations with past statements, the comedy created tension without needing to editorialize.
I looked at the circumstances surrounding the death of Jeffrey Epstein. According to the report, this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network, on Fox News.
Got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said,
the larger theme that emerged was predictability. Trump's political brand thrives on disruption and dominance. Yet, the reaction cycle to criticism has become remarkably consistent. Criticism appears, denunciation follows, supporters rally, and media coverage multiplies. Josh treated that cycle like a metronome, implying that even the outrage now runs on schedule. Leavitt's defense of Trump often centers on the claim that cultural institutions are biased against conservative voices. Che reframed this by suggesting that if every institution you dislike is corrupt, the list will eventually include anyone holding a microphone. The humor was sharp because it questioned the sustainability of a strategy built entirely on external blame. Trump's relationship with late-night comedy has always been combative. During his presidency, he floated the idea that equal time rules should apply to shows that mock him, a suggestion that collided with constitutional realities. Joss alluded to this tension by implying that demanding fairness from satire misunderstands the genre, since comedy answers to timing rather than campaign committees. As the segment continued, Leto portrayed less as an individual villain and more as a symbol of a communication strategy that thrives on confrontation.
Spent so much time stalking Greenland like an absolute psycho. He's basically become a guy on a dating app. He's like, hey, Greenland, you look so good. And Greenland's like, haha, thanks. And Trump's like, seriously, I need you. I'd literally give $700 billion to be with you.
At this point, Che implied that the louder the denunciation, the more it reinforces the caricature being mocked. In that sense, the reaction became part of the joke, rather than a rebuttal to it. The brilliance of the roast lay in its reliance on documented behavior rather than speculation. Trump's public statements, Leavitt's interviews, and the campaign's messaging are all accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Just simply curated the highlights in a way that felt cohesive, turning scattered moments into a narrative arc. Michael Che closed the thematic loop by suggesting that in an era where politics is indistinguishable from entertainment, being parodied is not a scandal, but a milestone. The more central a figure becomes to the national conversation, the more inevitable the satire. If Trump's brand depends on dominating attention, then becoming a recurring character in comedy sketches is less an attack and more a side effect. In the aftermath, no policies changed and no campaigns ended. Trump continued to campaign. Leavitt continued to defend him, and the news cycle rolled forward. However, the sting lingered because the jokes did not invent flaws. They amplified patterns. Justin Che alternated between humor and observation so seamlessly that the critique felt embedded in the laughter.
President Trump also complained about immigrants from countries like Haiti and asked, why can't we have some people from Norway instead? Or how about someone who's Norwegian and Haitian, like Times Square Elsa?
Ultimately, what was exposed was not a vault of secrets, but a rhythm of response has become so familiar it borders on ritual. When outrage is deployed against every critic, comedians included, it risks losing its shock value. The segment's sharpest insight was that the real vulnerability may not be any single controversy, but the predictability of the reaction itself. In a political landscape obsessed with dominance, being predictable is the one weakness satire never misses. What made the entire exchange even more combustible was the timing within the broader election cycle, because every joke now exists inside a high-stakes environment where narratives are weaponized within minutes. The Trump campaign has positioned itself as embattled but unstoppable, framing legal challenges and media scrutiny as proof of existential threat. When satire steps into that storyline and treats it like a recurring sitcom premise, it does not merely mock the characters. It questions the durability of the script. Colin Joe subtly underscored how often Trump's messaging leans on the idea that strength is demonstrated through counterattack. The irony, of course, is that counterattacking comedians elevates them into sparring partners rather than background noise. By responding forcefully to jokes, the campaign effectively confirmed their relevance, transforming what could have been a fleeting punchline into a multi-day controversy. The attempt to dismiss the humor as insignificant clashed visibly with the urgency of the rebuttals.
This week, Trump declared himself the acting president of Venezuela. By next week, he will be the interim Ayatollah of Iran, and then on to his ultimate goal, head reindeer of Greenland. In fact, a congressman has introduced a bill to make Greenland the 51st state. Meanwhile, Puerto Rico's like, wow, okay.
Without hesitating, Michael Che amplified that contradiction by zeroing in on tone. He implied that perpetual indignation can begin to resemble branding rather than conviction, especially when every critique, whether from journalists, prosecutors, or comedians, is categorized under the same umbrella of coordinated hostility. The exaggeration worked because it reflected a real pattern in contemporary political rhetoric, where nuance is often sacrificed in favor of maximalist framing. Karoline Leavitt's presence in the storm highlighted another tension, the balancing act between loyalty and adaptability. As a spokesperson, she is tasked with defending a figure whose communication style is famously unfiltered, which means a defense strategy must constantly evolve to keep pace. The satire suggested that this rapid adaptation sometimes creates a rhetorical whiplash, where yesterday's framing quietly dissolves to accommodate today's headline. That observation delivered through humor carried more sting than a direct accusation would have. The segment also tapped into a broader fatigue among voters who feel trapped in an endless loop of scandal and rebuttal by compressing years of controversies and counter-controversies into a few tightly arranged jokes. The comedians expose how repetitive the cycle has become. The laughter that followed was not merely amusement. It was recognition of a pattern that has defined American politics for nearly a decade.
Last week, President Trump hosted multiple events at the Kennedy Center, including an award ceremony for Sylvester Stallone, Gloria Gaynor, and rock band Kiss, as well as a musical performance by the Village People, which raises the question, is Donald Trump a gay man from 1978?
There's an uncomfortable symmetry in watching a movement that mastered viral outrage struggle when that same virality turned comedic. Trump's early dominance of social media platforms demonstrated how effectively he could command attention. However, attention is neutral currency. It does not discriminate between applause and parody. When clips of Jost and Chase segments spread across platforms, they traveled along the same digital highways that once amplified Trump's own posts. In pushing the narrative further, the comedy implied that modern campaigns operate less like traditional political organizations and more like media production studios, constantly generating content, framing reactions, and measuring engagement. Within that framework, Leavitt becomes not just a spokesperson, but a recurring character in a larger drama. The satire suggested that when politics adopts episodic storytelling, it must also accept episodic critique. In the end, the sharper edge of the roast lay in its refusal to treat outrage as sacred. By framing indignation as predictable and almost mechanical, the segment challenged the emotional foundation of the campaign's messaging. If outrage can be anticipated, timed, and even parodied before it arrives, then it loses some of its potency. That realization, more than any individual joke, explains why the response felt so intense.